Hello, everybody. It's 8 o'clock in the UK on the Smart Connector group. I am very, very excited tonight to be joined by somebody who's all over the other side of the world in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Brian Sands.
Thank you, Jane. It's great. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So I am so excited to interview Brian because Brian is a turnaround guy. He's actually a turnaround and transformation guy, and he's a fly in and fly out guy
Yeah.
that comes in whenever there's a really serious problem that he has to fix. So we've got going to have a great conversation tonight about some of your experiences, Brian,
Mm.
and your background is construction, right? Construction and development,
Yeah.
big companies.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in construction all my life. Actually, I started off with a carpentry apprenticeship, hard to say, but 30 something years ago. So I have a carpentry apprenticeship at one end and a university master's degree at the end, and a whole heap of, I say bumps and bruises, but a lot of experience in the middle and along the way. So,
And you've just launched your book, haven't you?
yeah, last Friday I released a book called Stop the Bleeding, which I guess it's not a medical journal. It's a book that's really talking about my experiences in my own business quite some time ago, 10 years ago during the GFC, as the foundation for the lessons that I've not only learnt doing that, but what I've done for other people since. So, yeah, as a fly in, fly out guy, I do get involved in other businesses that are going through or need turnaround or transformation. Sometimes it's new business, it's growth, which is the good, the fun stuff. It's all fun stuff, but Stop the Bleeding is about that, really. It's a how-to guide, I call it.
How to guide for crisis management. And there's a lot of
Yeah,
crisis going on at the moment in business, isn't there,
mm.
Brian?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
over the world.
yeah, absolutely. It is a how-to guide. I guess the book's got two. It's got two angles. One is the how-to guide, and the other one is it's what I call a mind shift for me. I learnt a lot of stuff on the way when your back's to the wall or you're on the edge of the cliff, which I know sounds um, a bit serious. Not, there was some pretty serious stuff going on, but you've got to learn to do things differently, or you've got to actually be willing to do things differently. If you don't, more of the same leads to nowhere. So there's a lot of things I learned. I had some great mentors, and a lot of that's gone into the book.
Mhm. And of course, the thing about construction and development is that it's very linked to the economy, isn't it? So there,
Oh yeah.
obviously, this is also my background as well because I have another business in property. So I
Mm,
know that it's very, very sensitive business, isn't it, to all
yeah.
the economic fluctuations, and there are so many things that can go wrong that are outside of your control. So I'm
Mm.
really interested to get into that tonight, Brian.
Yeah, great. Yeah, love to. Love to. Absolutely.
And you have a startup as well, don't you? Tech startup as well.
Yeah, I've been working on it for most of this year, and so I don't know how long startups usually take to get going. I feel like it's taken forever. Um, can't say much about it, but it's a hopefully in about 4 or 5 weeks I'll be walking down the street seeking some investment. But it's a natural language processing technology which is all around um, employee well-being or employee health on the basis that healthy people create successful businesses. So
Mhm.
yeah, let me get a few weeks down the track and I'll tell you more about it.
Yeah. And we actually had a really interesting discussion before this podcast started, didn't we,
Mm,
Brian?
mm,
Because
mm.
I was explaining that my business, the Smart Connect, is really all about putting people first and about putting
Yeah.
people before profit. And of course, profit is incredibly important. That is essential to running a successful business. But
Mm,
if you treat your the people around you well, and if you really pay attention to their well-being and you build those successful relationships, then you are going to have a more profitable business, aren't you, Brian?
yeah, look, it's spot on, and I'm really glad we spoke about that at the start because that is really fundamentally the first mind shift for me in this. The mind shift I referred to in this book is people. The people light went on for me, and I realized that we can have all this ego attached to building and growing and hanging on to our business through crisis or whatever, but people are your ultimate enablers. It's not
Hmm.
the process, it's not the product, it's not the profit, they're
Yeah.
results, but people are your ultimate enablers. So yeah, big fan of that, and that's one of the things I love doing when I fly in and fly out of businesses is seeing changes in people.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'll look forward to hearing more about that, Brian, as we progress the interview. But
Sure.
first of all, I just wanted to find out a little bit more about you.
Hmm.
Obviously, an Australian. Did you grow up in Australia? And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I am an Aussie,
okay,
um,
through and
of
through.
English heritage, obviously, as we all are here, pretty much. Yeah, Australian, born and bred, been in the construction industry all my life. This is what I do. So, as I say, I explained at the start, I carpentry apprenticeship. So I started building houses out of the back of an old Ford station wagon, and my first direct report was a Australian cattle dog called Chloe. So it's a bit of a funny story, but that's how I started. And yeah, I've just been in this industry all along, and I've never. My kids think it's quite humorous. They say that I've never had a job, which is quite true. I've always worked for myself. So, and I've always worked in this space. So
Okay, right. So you said that you started your career working in as a carpenter. So how did you
yeah,
get to be from that to how did you develop into a business turnaround guy and problem solver and
yeah,
change manager and all of the things that you do now
yeah.
to stop the bleeding?
Yeah, that's great. Look, it took me a while to work out, but I get a kick out of solving problems, and problems don't necessarily need to be a negative word. A problem is just something that you don't have an answer to yet. So whether it's getting a business from now to next or problem to solution, that's just something that I like doing. But the history of it, look, I've reflected on it a lot. When I started this business as a carpenter, out of an apprenticeship, working for myself, well, the stock market had just crashed, and I was looking for work. So I was building houses as an independent contractor, and when the stock market crashed, there was very little work. So I actually went to I don't know whether you have it over there or what you would, but over here it's called Centrelink, where you go and look for a job or you stand in a queue. So I stood in a queue looking for a job,
Okay.
and I got a job with a commercial contractor. Went and worked in his office for 8 hours. My interview went for 8 hours, and I ended up doing some work for him and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I ended up working for him for 6 years, and I actually helped expand his business from Australia to New Zealand. I was 28, and I set his business up for him in New Zealand as well. So I just went from carpenter to an administrative supervisory sort of role, and kept just taking on other responsibilities, and at quite a young age, and it just started going from there. I set this guy's business up in New Zealand, really successful for him. He did the wrong thing by me in terms of bonuses and incentives, so I said, see you later, mate, I'm out. And I did, and came back to Australia, joined another business, and within a couple of years I sought an opportunity to buy into that business, and so I bought into that business. I bought out the founding director of that business. I'm trying to keep it a quick story.
Mhm.
And when I bought into that business, the business had problems. It's had some pretty horrible contracts, which, my bad for not really doing some deep due diligence. I was about 30 years old at the time. And, I remember starting that business when I stepped into the big chair in the big office in the corner and he'd left. It was like, what am I going to do now? So not disastrous, but there was a fair bit to fix, and that's how we started. And I just loved it. I just loved getting in and solving these problems, and that was a business that I was fortunate to be able, with great people and a really good reputation within the business in the industry. I grew that business from $34 million turnover to over 100 million in 4 years without any external capital, no shareholder debt, and it was just a fantastic ride, and it really fired me up in terms of what really excited me, and that was growing business, growing people, that sort of thing. So then, there's a whole other story around the GFC came and wiped that smile off my face for a while.
Okay, so the
And
GFC for our UK listeners, GFC is
global financial crisis, I'm sorry,
the
which
global
played out.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
The global
yeah,
financial crisis happened. So you got this amazing growth. I mean, which is really phenomenal. So 34 to 100 million. That's just
yeah,
incredible. Um,
yeah.
you inherited some problems, some bad contracts that needed to be solved. So
Yeah.
you did all of that. What happened over the global financial crisis?
But look, the global financial crisis, I think, you started talking about earlier how things can go wrong in property, some things you just don't see. And the invisible risk, as I call it, in a lot of businesses, but in property and construction,
Mm-hmm.
is this hierarchy of subcontractors in the supply chain, which sits underneath the contract.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a tier of contractors, and you don't actually see right down to the bottom. And what happened during the GFC for us, I was spending some time in the Middle East. I was looking to expand this business over there into the Middle East because if you remember pre-GFC, things were going gangbusters over in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, all that sort of thing. But I remember coming back to the business and in and out of the business. And this one particular day, I saw a guy sitting in my office and I thought, why is he there? He was an electrical subcontractor, winning so much of our work and all of this sort of stuff. So I just thought he was around too much. And this guy had picked up a lot of our work. I knew he was a bit of a dubious character. The alarm bell started to go. I started digging deeper. I had 130 staff at this stage and a management structure. And basically, it was just very coincidental. Within a series of 2 or 3 days, that contractor and a few others that were part of his hierarchy just started going pop. They just went broke.
Really?
So what really nearly took us down was the insolvency of subcontractors. We had a pipeline of work. So I say we had 130 staff, had about 12 or 15 projects at that time. However, with the subcontractors going broke, we still had an obligation as the head contractor to complete all those works.
Mm.
So what we thought was a $500,000 problem, which is still a decent sum of money, involved into a $5 million problem over the period of a very short time, a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And I knew
Oh,
back at that stage, that as a business, we had $5 million in the bank in retained earnings or cash reserves, if you like. And we're doing some numbers saying, well, this problem could be, I actually knew it was about 5.4 million was the problem. 5 million was in the bank. The problem was going to take some time to fix. From a director's responsibility around insolvency, it's like, what do we do? Obviously, there was an option to turn the lights off before we put the key in the door and get an administrator in to, sort of administer all of our responsibilities. It got to that point. It got to that frightening stage because we were looking at 5 million in problems, but what else was coming? We didn't know. The world was falling apart. This was just the tip of the iceberg.
and this is
So
2008.
this was actually after it. This was the year after it. So it's sort of like that concept of musical chairs, if you like.
Mm.
Music had stopped and there wasn't too many left. And
Yeah.
we'd survived the GFC and we thought we were pretty good. But little did we know there was some other stuff coming our way. So we just decided, I had a couple of business partners and I was the major shareholder and managing director of that business. And we decided to fight. So similar to how we grew the business and similar to how I started a business out of the back of a car when the stock market crashed, it was just, let's get on with it. And it was just, it was full on, if I could say that. It was very intense. It was a pretty busy 12 months to actually turn around. And what ended up happening is that we were successful. I was able to recover $1 million a month for 7 months out of the next 9. So, and that's really, I guess that's the essence of my book, is that how-to guide, stepping through the different parameters of people, leadership and strategy. But it was really, I guess if I was to explain how we could turn around $1 million a month, it was not having a short-term view of fixing the problem next week. It was more about if we're going to get out of this, we need to see what success looks like in a year's time or 6 months' time. We've got to go for that. We can't just go for tomorrow because we don't know what's coming then. And a lot of it, we talk about people before. It was about people. The people were frightened. Their livelihood was at stake. Their mortgages were, at risk. If you recall, it's very similar to what's going on now. So the first thing I had to do is say, we're in trouble, company. And here's all these projects we've got. They've all got this sort of timeline. You're all secure in this position. In 3 months' time, we might be looking for a job for you. 6 months for you. I made it people understand what was in it for them. So if I could protect their livelihood first, which was a risk for me because my business, I was putting my family and my livelihood at the back of the queue, really, and which is psychologically, it's a tough thing to do. But all the people were fired up. They knew what they had to do to hang on to their job and help rebuild the business, and that was really a bigger story. But that was really what was the foundation of our success, was the people, not me negotiating something with a client or a contractor. It was the people.
That is just an amazing story, and actually reminds me of I think I did a podcast or maybe wrote something, a blog post or something about Starbucks, and about the guy that ran Starbucks who faced a similar kind of meltdown
Mm,
point, and he'd actually taken himself out of the business. But he was still the chairman, and it all fell apart. And he stepped back in and he cried in front of all of his employees. And it was
mm,
20 minutes, and they all kind of rallied round, and it became it was like a call to action. It was like a battle cry.
yeah.
They all got behind him. And I think what you're talking about is very, very inspirational. I mean, you could have behaved in a completely different way, couldn't you? Just
Well,
say,
quite often people do. Quite often people do, because our first instinct obviously is survival.
yeah.
So, I talk about in the book that I had a global strategy and a domestic strategy.
Mhm.
So my global strategy was to repair the business and sustain the business and keep going. My domestic strategy was to keep paying school fees and the mortgage on my own house and look after my family.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing about that is that I had to prioritize my global strategy before my domestic strategy.
Mhm.
So, it was really interesting. One of the things that I committed to with my staff at the time is that I knew I had a number in my mind that I knew that out of 130, I had to lose 60.
Yeah.
So I didn't articulate that to my staff, but what I did say to them, we would meet often. I'd drag them all in from sites, or I'd go to sites and all this sort of stuff, and I would explain the time frame to completion of their particular project or their role. And I committed to them that I would have them in another role, in another job, in another company before they finished.
Mm.
So unfortunately, I didn't quite get there, but being a bit cheeky, 59 out of 60, I was able to place somewhere else.
Really amazing.
And when when the business bounced back, 20 of those came straight back. So
Oh,
yeah, that's a really compelling. That gets me excited. That people stuff. So
oh yeah, yeah. That's really, really fantastic. And I think from the outside, a lot of people think construction is a very hard business. And in some
mm,
respects it is, isn't it? And I'm
mm,
sure obviously you're over the other side of the world, and maybe things are different, but generally it's a very nuts and bolts, very, very it's just a certain kind of business that maybe attracts certain types of people. But most of the people that I've met in construction are very, very passionate, who are running construction businesses. They work really hard and they're really passionate about what they do. And
mm,
um, I find it very, very inspiring that, you're able to operate in an industry like that with margins that are quite insecure,
oh yeah,
quite thin at times. You know,
yeah, very.
yeah, still, just really look after other people and care for them, and do the very best you can, to be
Mm,
an employer and make good money.
yeah, look, I agree, and I say, this Stop the Bleeding is the book, and the crisis we went through. It's a how-to guide and all this. It does have a happy ending because we repaired the business, and the business is still going today. And my two business partners at the time, I gave the business to. Well, I jokingly say I sold it to them, but they haven't paid me yet because I charged them $1 each. But I guess the point of it, I got to a point where it was a pretty full-on 3 years. It was very tough. Went through turnaround, transformation, and consolidation. These three very disciplined stages to get the business back to where we thought it needed to be. But at the end, I was a bit shot. I was psychologically, I was very tired. And then, just to your point about margins, I thought, what am I doing? Managing $100 million year business for 3% before tax. That's
Mm,
after all the risk you endure. So I'm not discouraging people from, continuing in this game. But to your point, you need to have a passion. You need to know what you're doing, and you need to really rely on your people, not just what you think you've got up here about how to build a building or or construct something or develop property. So
Mm. So let's talk a little bit about the transformation of the turnaround process, or that
mm,
troubleshooting thing, which I know everybody is fascinated by, that whole crisis management. So, do you
yeah.
have principles that you can share with our viewers and listeners, Brian?
Mm. Yeah, look, I do, and yeah, I think there's three things. Oh, there is a process to this, obviously, and it's something that evolves as you step through a business, and all the other stuff comes out of the cupboard as you travel. But I think in a position of leadership or ownership or whatever it is of a business, I think I would start with three things. I would say, forget about ego. It's actually about business sustainability and livelihood. So
Hmm.
you've actually got to roll your sleeves up, get your hands dirty, you got to own it. I find that in a lot of business, not as a lot of business, I've only really been doing it since I stepped out of my own business. I've been doing this again, for others for 10 years, but there is quite a lot of ego attached to ownership. Like, it's not my fault. It's someone else's fault, or it's because of this bank, or it's because of COVID, or whatever it is. Forget about that. It's not about ego. You need to own it, and you got to get it done, because that really plays into this second thing we talk about, people. And you've got to make it clear for your people that if you own it, your ego's gone. You own it. You drag your people up with you. You make it. It's that what's in it for me story. And I
Hmm.
think what you need to do from a people perspective is understand what the issues are, how the issues impact them. I use the example of my business where I knew there was mortgage stress within my whole workforce.
Hmm.
It might be that sort of stuff or something. You find out what is really hurting for your people from a livelihood perspective, and you try and fix it, or you address that. So I call it the psychological contract. So as a leader, you have a psychological contract with your people that enables them to walk away and say, righto, there is problem here, there's risk in the world, but this guy or this lady, this person is looking after me. And that's how they buy in. So
Hmm.
it's no ego, people, the psychological contract with your people. And the third thing, and again, there's much more thereafter, is start with the end in mind. It's not about, obviously, we need an answer for tomorrow. Might have to pay some bills or do whatever. We might need an answer for next week. But really, what does success look like by when? And how are you going to get there?
Hmm.
Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? Or break it up into 3 or 6 monthly? I think what I find is that if what's happened there? Sorry. What I find quite often is that so I've just lost you there, Joan.
Oh, if you refresh, I can still see you.
Oh, that's good. I'll just keep talking then until something. But just my point around starting with the end in mind is that if you start with tomorrow's problem or next week's problem, I think it just brings a short-sighted mindset, and I think a short-sighted mindset is not going to get you to where you need to be. So, in terms of crisis, they would be the three things I'd start with. I wouldn't roll out a massive list of here's what I need to do, because you'll just get buried by that.
Okay, so sorry, I was a little bit thrown because everything disappeared and then it came back. But anyway, we're back. Um, so I think the interesting thing about that is that it's a very fluid thing. But as you said, if you start with the end in mind, if you have that kind of North Star vision, then
Yeah.
in a way things become a lot simpler, don't they?
Well, yeah, they do, and as I say, you start to have a bit of a horizon or a runway.
Hmm.
As I say, the short steps, there will be short steps as well. You just get too distracted. I think that big picture disappears. It's very easy to say. It's hard to do. Let's face it. But when you need to, when especially from a crisis perspective, I think one of the risks for people, or one of the issues that I see, is I call it the holding on strategy. People
Hmm.
just hang on because tomorrow it'll be better, or tomorrow a client will call, or things will just fix by themselves because we go through a cycle. It's that sort of thing.
Mm. So when you get called in as the troubleshooter and the turnaround guy, you go in and out. What sort of businesses are you generally called in to fix? And
Yeah, sure.
are they construction companies or are they?
Yeah. So maybe I can give you an example of the last couple.
Yeah.
Um, and it's an interim role usually, depending on the scale of the turnaround or transformation. You
Hmm.
need to, I believe, to be successful, you need to be embedded in the role or in the business in some way. So
Hmm.
currently, usually I manage two projects at a time or two businesses at a time, depending on how the scale of it. So currently, I'm the interim CEO of an unlisted public company here in Australia, which is a property developer.
Hmm.
And they, unfortunately, well, the board has contacted me 2 months ago. They haven't been making money for 6 years.
Oh
And there
my
was a
goodness.
shareholder revolt. As a recent EGM. We've been able to convince the shareholders to back the incumbent board. And now I've designed a turnaround strategy that we'll start to implement as of next week, actually. Um, Recently, I had to shut down an Australian branch of a New Zealand construction company that also wasn't making any money in Australia and was carrying a whole heap of risk. So that, for example, was an an interim management role for 9 months. It's a couple of days a week. That's how I usually sort of work it out. I make sure I use the people inside the business. So
Hmm.
not only do we use the people with the knowledge, but we can develop the people as well inside the business.
Yeah.
I think it's a great learning experience if people are prepared to see crisis as a learning experience. So that was a pretty interesting one. That had, for example, that had a $14 million problem when I joined them, and unfortunately couldn't remove the problems. But when we wrapped it up, they only had a $6 million problem. I know it's still big money and it's still pretty frightening, but we took away $8 million worth of risk during that period.
Wow.
What else can I tell you? I've also been involved in some business origination or a business expansion. So I've recently been doing a role with a global property developer, actually,
Hmm.
based in China. And I've helped activate $1 billion property pipeline for them here in Australia. So that's more, again, it's a people strategy thing. It's about getting the right people with the right skills in the right role, doing the right thing. So that's been a bit of fun as well. So that's the type of thing that
Amazing. I mean, it's a very exciting business, isn't it, really?
I,
Property.
I love it. I
Yeah.
really do. And I don't want to, I know it's unfortunate that people are, need to go through these sort of transformation things, but I'm fortunate to get some job offers from time to time. But that sort of a business as usual CEO or senior executive or something just doesn't excite me. I wouldn't be any good for them. I wouldn't be fired up.
Yeah. So developers, I mean, I know a lot of developers. I'm quite networked in property development circles here in London.
Mhm.
So, so what would you say is the main cause of developers getting into trouble, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I would say a couple of recent experiences for me would be really poor upfront due diligence work.
Hmm.
In property, obviously, there's this concept around feasibility,
Hmm.
and anyone can make a feasibility work. Quite simply, you tweak some numbers. I'm going to get a better deal here. I can drop my internal rate of return to this. Okay, there's a few challenges in the world, so my return on equity can drop down to sort of bank plus a margin. So I think people play with the metrics. I don't think due diligence is done well enough in all cases. People are trying to get a deal. They're trying to get a project going.
Mm.
And then I think they really need to look at the contractor supply chain. It's quite easy, again, to get a great price from a builder. Awesome, that makes my feasibility work. But do they have the capability to see it through? Are they going to deliver a quality project? So again, a lot of this is external. It's all about the process you have and the people you have. It gets back to people. Have you got the right person putting your due diligence and your feasibility together? Have you got the right people to build it? It's that type of thing.
Mm.
So
And
um,
yeah, so I was just going to say that issue of builders going to the wall, main contractors going to the wall, is quite a common one. I know
hmm,
a couple of developers that have had that experience recently, and they had to take over the management of the project
yeah.
themselves. And of course, that was not what they'd envisaged, and that had a major impact on their businesses as well.
Yeah, and from a financial perspective, because
Mm.
usually, it's not simply a case of drawing the line, builder out, developer in. There's always this financial overlap. There's this time overlap. There's this
Mm,
warranty overlap. What are you warranting that has already been built, for example? And I think a lot of it is certainly about people. And these construction companies are really trying to build scale around people, but people capability is really the big issue. I think people try to start with capability, but they just I think that's something that businesses fail on big time.
mm. So what would be your advice? Because I think that development is probably happens in the same way the world over. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, it's going to be slightly different in Australia because you're a big country and you
Mm,
may not have the planning restrictions and regulations that we have here in the UK because we're only a small island. But I'm sure
mm.
that there are some, constants, if you like. And so, what would you say is the main piece of advice that you would give anybody in property? In terms of that due diligence process.
Mm. I think it's been with any business. I think it's about understanding what your purpose is.
Hmm.
So, is your purpose to build a development to create a profit,
Hmm.
or is your purpose to, for example, to develop a sustainable living that's going to attract a certain scale and volume of buyer. So
Hmm.
you're creating your own sustainability. You're not getting yourself into a crowded market of building apartments, for example, because everyone else is building apartments.
Mm.
So that due diligence phase, I think, is about your product.
Yeah,
I think you've got to have a compelling story around your product.
yeah.
And then I think you've got to have the right people to actually do that for you, people that know about that product. I think one of the things that I say to people around scaling a business or even starting a business,
Hmm.
and it gets back to ego, find a partner.
Hmm.
The pace of change these days and what technology can bring for us, I think scaling a business with a partner is really the ultimate opportunity to really get in front of the game. So if it's property development and it's due diligence, maybe you partner with a person who is purely an expert in the acquisition phase, for example.
Mm. I think that's great advice, and I've noticed, particularly in property, that most people they do find partners, and some of the most successful businesses are partnerships for that
Yeah.
reason because it's leverage, isn't it? It's two plus
Mm.
two equals five.
Yeah, exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. So I guess even from an external capability perspective, from a financial capability perspective, some people, well, I find less and less actually, but some people don't want to give anything away. This is all mine. I'm going to hang on to this, and this is that ego as well. But you see the people who have partnerships, and they don't necessarily need to be shareholding partnerships. They might be a contracting partnership, and share the risk and share the upside. But they are the businesses that scale and get traction.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I really liked about property when I came into this industry, is that thing about collaboration and teams, and that you cannot run a property successful property development business really as a lone wolf. It's almost impossible. I think I
Mm,
don't know. Well, I suppose I do know people that have done that, but I think
mm,
their lives have been very, very stressful. When I look at
yeah.
them, I just see the insulating impact really of having
Mm.
partnerships and having that really close knit team. It really, really makes it work, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And it's about sharing risk. Like you talk about
Mm,
the lone wolf, working out of the back of his car. I
mm,
mean, ultimately, what does he want to achieve? What's his compelling reason for doing that? You
mm,
know, what is important to him? Some people want to be the lone wolf and just plod along and build a development or renovate something at a time. I think, that's a different story. Good luck to them. They're happy with that. If you're trying to scale a business as a lone wolf, as you say, I think you really need to have a look at, what is your end game? Where do you want to be by when, and how are you going to get there with whom?
mm. And I love your really, really strategic focus on that. I think it's just so important. And of course, it was Stephen Covey, wasn't it, the famous thought leader that that really emphasize
Yeah,
that thing of like start with the end in mind. And it's certainly
yeah,
one of my favorite sayings as well. You know, if I find myself kind of wobbling, or if I'm helping some of the people that I work with, and they're at a crossroads, I often say
mm,
the same thing. I think it's so important, isn't it? Just taking that
yeah.
top down view.
It really is. And, to use the Stephen Covey example, and look, not everything sticks in here, but, he had the 7 habits, as you know, and that was the only one that really jumped out at me. And it just makes sense. And yeah, so important.
Cool. So your book, Stop the Bleeding.
Mm.
What inspired you to write that, Brian? Other than
Well,
it's
well,
amazing to bring your wisdom to the world.
yeah. Look, I really suffered a lot of imposter syndrome about the whole book story, but it is back to my business in the GFC. And when we went from that period of, we got a $500,000 problem here, okay, we can deal with that, to all of a sudden it's a $5 million problem. My CFO reminded me sometime later that I used to drive him nuts with how are we going to stop the bleeding. So it was a phrase that I was using a bit too often, obviously, at the time. And look, that's how it really, that was the origins from the book. And when I left my business in 2013, I had a couple of notepads. Obviously, I was carrying some stuff around up here, and I was always just writing things down and things that I'd learnt during that period. I had a great mentor during that period who remains a great friend of mine. And but I would always write this stuff down, and I was starting to do this for other people and scribbling models. The book has got about 20 models and frameworks that I've sort of created. I'm a scribbler, so I
Wow.
created all this stuff, and got to December last year, and I was really thinking about, will I write a book? Will I not? And if I can just share the short story, I went to a writer's workshop in Sydney. So I flew up to Sydney. I thought, I'm going to have a look at this. I'm going to see whether this is me. I'm not really a self promoter like that. So I went to this writer's workshop. And there was a lady there, and who was running this workshop of 30 people, and it was to work out, or just to explain how you would write a book, how would you go about it. And I took my story up there, and she had a couple of colleagues there who would walk the room and help us out. And I spent some time with a lady who said, yeah, this is great, your story's fantastic. And there's a little bit of a story in the book about an encounter with some people who ride motorbikes, let's say, during that GFC period. And anyway, that was sort of the part of, this is how I was going to start this story. And all of these girls, these colleagues thought it was great, of this lady who was running the workshop, but I wasn't satisfied. I didn't really enjoy my time with them. And I remember speaking to my wife on the phone and said, it's not doing it for me. I just don't love it. It's not great. I'm going to be on an earlier flight. And then the lady who was running the show happened to walk past and say, tell me. And I told her, she said, that's rubbish. It doesn't make sense. No one's going to buy that. And I said, awesome. What are they going to buy? So we spent only 15 minutes, and she fundamentally changed it for me. I missed my flight, got home late, and said, I'm writing a book. And it's just amazing how you meet someone who can change fundamentally your thought and your vision. And I wrote the book in January, and I took January off and said, right, I'm just going to write a book. And then it took a few months, or 6 months thereafter, to produce it and put it together. So that's how I got to a book.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I can't wait to read it. It sounds
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
So we've got some questions coming through, Brian. If
sure.
that's okay, I'm just going to read these. Okay, we've got quite a few actually, but one of the ones is, what is the main reason clients come to you, Brian? Is one of those questions.
Um, I believe it's because I've got the experience from not only a builder, so in the construction and property spaces where most of my work comes from. Although what I'm trying to do, I believe business, I think a lot of what I do can fit across business generally. However, I have the background of building houses, building buildings. I'm a registered building practitioner still. So, I can go out there and build something. And a lot of these businesses, whilst it is about people, you've also got to have an understanding of where the risk is.
Hmm.
Whether you walk out onto a building site or you understand what the portfolio of projects are. So I think the reason why people come to me is that I have undertaken a significant turnaround in my own business. One of the outcomes of that turnaround was I created a $250 million joint venture with a publicly listed company subsidiary. So I got some exposure in that space. And as I say, I know how to build. I'm not some guy in a shiny suit, perhaps, who turns up and says, okay, I'm an analyst, I'm going to do this, we're going to change this, we're going to move the money from here to here. I actually believe I know how to build business and build buildings.
That's great. Are property businesses based on reputations and relationships? And how much does a new business rely on content, marketing, and perception?
Wow. Um,
Interesting question.
it is an interesting question. So it's two parts, really, isn't it? So if I was to assume that question is around, I've got a new property business or a development business or a construction business, I've got to get it out there. Is content marketing going to help me? Yes, it is, but I think your content marketing has got to have a message around to whom you can add value. So any business that I would go into or person that I might mentor, I would ask them straight off and say, it's a very difficult question to answer, but to whom do you add value? With what services, where, and what is your point of distinction? So there's 4 questions in that. So in terms of content marketing, I would break that down and say, okay, if I've got this experience, as I've got a reputation as a solo person, how do I put that out there? I'd answer that question. And the piece about reputation, absolutely. One of the reasons I believe that my business got through the global financial crisis and that $1 million a month turnaround was reputation. We had a pretty good reputation. Um, I I pretty much call it how it is. So I would go to my clients with a hard hat and a safety vest, and we'd walk the site and I'd say, we're in trouble. The global financial crisis is hurting us. However, this is our strategy. And that's the only reason that I think we got through that was based on reputation. So hopefully I've answered the question. Reputation, absolutely key, builds partnerships, builds relationships, but your content marketing, I think, very tough to start with nothing. I think you've got to have a reason behind your content marketing as well.
Yeah, I was actually I'm working with a guy at the moment who's got an engineering business, and we were having a whole discussion about that this morning. And it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Because I see quite a lot of developers kind of push back against this idea of brand. And what
Mm,
I often say to them is, look, it's not just about the shiny wrapping. It's not just about the kind of bells and whistles and, here I am outside my exciting development site. It's actually like brand is a behavioral thing as well. It's
yeah,
something that runs right through an organization, and it's to do with everything, with how you conduct yourself, how you behave
mm,
in business, how you deal with people. And that thing about reputation is also brand equity that's built up
totally.
for a period of time.
Yeah,
Not
you
everybody.
got to, yeah. I think people need to have a reason people will say, "Why me?" I mean, to answer the question before, well, to the question before, why do people engage me? Well, people want to understand why themselves. They need to know. I shouldn't need to. Well, I do need to tell them why me, but to your point around brand and that other question around reputation and content, you've got to provide people an opportunity to answer that why question about you themselves. So you don't have to go down to this big path of, I'm the greatest, I'm this, I can do this, I can be. I mean, a million people do that. So people have got to be answer your why for you.
Yeah, what's your difference and what's your
Yeah,
unique value? Definitely.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Very to that. Okay, so
yeah.
another question here, Brian, which is how much impact do you think people have on helping turn around a business crisis? That's from Dan.
Yeah, well, I think absolutely fundamental. It is about the people. I think when I go into a business, I break it down in my mind, perhaps, and there's 5 P's, if you like, for me, and it's purpose, it's people, it's process, it's product, and it's profit. But in front of all that is people, because people are the ones who collectively create your purpose. I mean, again, what is your reason for being in business? Your people will be the foundation of that. People will create the process
Mhm.
that creates the product that in turn creates the profit. So people are everything, and people quite often, I think the important thing about people, and I'm sorry about going on about people because I do. Um, I've in my book, I've created this model. Look, I am essentially a builder many years ago, so I try and keep things very simple. I've created this model called ACE people. People are ACE. And what ACE means is aligned, capable, and engaged. So people hire on capability, a great project manager or a great development manager because he's created great margins before. But quite often they don't go, or they don't look for the people who are also aligned and engaged, like they want to do something and they know what to do something. So
Mm.
to answer the question, people are critical. And if you can get ACE people, aligned, capable, and engaged, or if you like people that can, know, and want, then you'll create an ACE culture as well. And then you've got every opportunity to be successful.
I love that. I think that's so great.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, I really do. I really do. And it's a very, very strategic approach. I can see that everything, the way that you think is very strategic. It's very top down. And
Yeah.
yeah, I recognize that. I love it.
I try
Okay.
not to be, I'm not an academic person. I've got some academia, I guess, but we've got to keep it simple because, strategy and people and culture, people can get caught up in this academia and actually not understand it and be able to implement it. So what's the point?
Yeah, that's right. I've just seen another comment that says, Jane, could you come nearer or adjust the mic? It's a low sound from you. So, oops, never mind. I'm not the star of the show tonight, so
Yeah.
hopefully I'll
Oh,
just
yes,
take.
you are.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So Brian, what's on the cards for you over the next couple of months? Then, what are you involved in right now?
Okay. This transformation or turnaround of this unlisted public company will take a bit of work. So
Mhm.
I've just committed to them for 4 months to help do that. And I usually, that'll be a part-time gig, if you like. I won't tell the world or their clients, or the world may know. But so I will do that over the next 4 months. As I said, I really want to walk down the streets with my seed deck for this technology and see if I can get some interest in that. I do have a couple of other opportunities out there with a guy who is a volume builder here in Melbourne and wants to expand up the east coast of Australia. So
Okay.
that's not turnaround, that's transformation, that's building scale, that's fun. And I have another opportunity with a high net worth individual who's keen to create a bit of a satellite suburb within a suburb. So again, property centric, construction centric, but scaling some businesses. So yeah, that's what the next probably 4 to 6 months looks like for me.
Amazing. That sounds really exciting. And
Yeah.
just in terms of the property development landscape in Australia, because as I
Mm,
said, I have a lot of Brits that are either watching tonight or they'll be watching on replay, or that's generally my audience. And property development, the big issue here in the UK is the planning laws, which are very,
mm,
very restrictive. I mean, there have been some changes recently, and there have been some of the restrictions lifted, but because we're just a tiny island, it's a lot of the cities are that there really is no very little scope for new build in some of the more desirable
mm,
areas. There just isn't, because it was all done. So
mm.
really, the only opportunity is conversion. Would you say that just out of interest, in Australia, that there are still big swathes of land that are undeveloped, or is it
Yeah.
all very restrictive in terms of planning?
Look, we do have, I think we have some seriously restrictive planning, perhaps not compared to you over there, where you do have a lot of older and historical buildings. However, it would be not uncommon to wait 12 or undertake a 12 to 15-month planning process for a significant commercial or residential building in any of the capital cities.
Okay.
For example, in certain parts of Sydney, they have
Mhm.
this two-step design excellence process, which can actually take 3 years.
Wow, three
So
years.
you would just use that as, not in all cases, but one example would be a developer would get a design done, they would submit it to the City of Sydney in certain areas, this is, and then City of Sydney would put that out to a design competition where other architects would respond and add value. That would go back to public consultation. That could be 3 years.
Wow.
Um, I've been working in some other stuff in Melbourne here, pointing here, it's that way, that takes 12 to 15 months for student accommodation, for example. One of my clients previously, I didn't mention before, is one of the world's largest student accommodation developers, which started in the UK, a company called Unite Group.
Oh, yeah.
So
My daughter lived in a Unite student block in
did
the
you? Yeah, over here they're called I think they're called the Student Housing Company over there as well. So part of their brand has set something. So just working on a couple of heritage buildings for them was sort of 15 months, 18 months to get planning. So there's still large areas of land. I guess people see Australia as a big island with a desert in the middle. I guess it is. I'm not that I've ever been there, but the metropolitan areas are really getting built out. There's still opportunity, however. High cost of land, long planning. You've really got to hang on to a feasibility for a long period of time. So trying to purchase sites with longer terms, for example, is really critical to that success. And partnering with a contractor, perhaps,
Mm.
a turnkey relationship. You buy the site, you develop the site, and a contractor comes in and build it, and you carve it up at the end, something like that. You've got to be able to share that risk that's associated with the time, the duration.
Well, fascinating. Well, Brian, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us. I
Thanks.
should say tonight because what time is it for you over there at the moment?
We started at 7, so it is 7:50
7:50. Okay, so it's 10 to 8.
a.m.
Yeah, 10 to 8
Yeah.
for you in the morning and 10 to 9 for us over here.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, that's very different is that we're in autumn and going into winter, and you're just looking forward to the summer, aren't you? So you must be very
Yeah,
weather at the
we're in
moment.
spring, and daylight savings time has just started in Melbourne a week ago as well. So we're just out of COVID lockdown, and we're now into blue skies, and it's all
Amazing.
coming together at once, hopefully.
Oh, that's lovely, lovely. Well,
Yeah,
I wish I was I could just teleport myself and just we could go
yeah, that's
after
right.
this and I
That's
could
right.
explore Melbourne.
Yes, please do. It's a great place.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, Brian. It's been an absolutely amazing interview, and we'll look
Oh,
forward
thanks,
to
Jane.
your book. Now, if anybody wants to contact you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think just via LinkedIn is easy.
Okay.
So I have obviously I have a profile on LinkedIn. So send me a message. I'd love to connect. And thanks for having me, Jane. It was a lot of fun. Enjoyed meeting you and talking about what we both do.
Absolutely. And if you ever come to the UK, you must let me know what once this is all over,
Yeah.
because we had a lot of property meetings. They've all gone online now, but you
Mm.
be a very, very interesting guest, I think, for quite a lot of people that I know. So
Oh, very kind of you.
all over, I can come over to Australia and visit you in
Yep.
Melbourne. You can come
It's a
over.
deal. It's a deal. As I said, I was there a year ago, so it might be another year or two till we're there again. But thanks for the invitation for today and to keep in touch. It's been great.
Certainly. Okay. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.